Day 350 of the Trump administration brings a bombshell report on President Trump's attempt to interfere in the Russia investigation. The New York Times headline tonight, obstruction inquiry shows Trump's struggle to keep grip on Russia investigation. Michael Schmidt of the Times reporting, quote, President Trump gave firm instructions in March to the White House's top lawyer, stop the Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, from recusing himself in the Justice Department's investigation into whether Mr. Trump's associates had helped a Russian campaign to disrupt the 2016 election. The Times, citing two sources, say McGahn tried and he failed. The report goes on, Mr. McGahn was unsuccessful and the president erupted in anger in front of numerous White House officials, saying he needed his attorney general to protect him. Mr. Trump said he expected his top law enforcement official to safeguard him in the way he believed Robert F. Kennedy, as Attorney General, had done for his brother John F. Kennedy, and Eric H. Holder Jr. had done for Barack Obama. You might remember last week President Trump sat down for an impromptu 30-minute interview with that same New York Times reporter, Michael Schmidt, while vacationing at Mar-a-Lago. And in it, you might remember Trump made similar comments about Holder and Obama. Quote, I will say this, Holder protected President Obama, totally protected him. When you look at all of the tremendous real problems they had, not made up problems like Russian collusion, these were real problems. When you look at the things that they did, and Holder protected the president, and I have great respect for that. The New York Times also reports tonight that Mueller has corroborated FBI Director James Comey's claims that he felt pressure to drop the Russia investigation. And then there's this shocking detail. Quote, the president's determination to fire Mr. Comey even led one White House lawyer to take the extraordinary step of misleading Mr. Trump about whether he had the authority to remove him. Our leadoff panel tonight, Michael Crowley, national security editor and senior correspondent for Politico, Kimberly Atkins, chief White House reporter for the Boston Herald, and Peter Baker, chief White House correspondent for the New York Times. Peter, let's start with you. This is your colleagues reporting. Lay it out for us.
Well, this is adding a lot new flavor to our understanding of the first months of the Trump presidency when this Russia probe was really getting underway. And you see from the events that Michael Schmidt, my colleague, has outlined just how much the president felt the investigation was getting out of his control and how much he didn't really understand why that was happening. As far as he was concerned, the Justice Department was supposed to answer to him. And the idea that Jeff Sessions, the attorney general, might recuse himself was mystifying to him. Wasn't Jeff Sessions supposed to be there to protect him? As you said, his Bobby Kennedy. At one point he says, where's my Roy Cohn, referring to the old McCarthy aide and lawyer who had been a friend of President Trump's in earlier days. And it really kind of tells you about the mindset of the president at this time, and it does suggest that the special counsel, Robert Mueller, is focusing intently on whether there might be a case for obstruction of justice.
Certainly that. There's also this quote from the New York Times, Michael. The New York Times has learned that 4 days before Mr. Comey was fired, one of Mr. Sessions' aides asked a congressional staff member whether he had damaging information about Mr. Comey, part of an apparent effort to undermine the FBI director. This is an aide of Jeff Sessions going to Congress, going to staffers on Congress, looking for dirt on the FBI director. Have you ever heard of such a thing?
Maybe you would have to go back to Roy Cohn to come up with a precedent for that, Katie. And I think that that might have been the most startling detail in that incredible story. You know, as Peter said, in some ways that story adds flavor to our understanding of Donald Trump in the White House in these early months, but it's consistent with things that we knew, that Trump was telling people that the Russia investigation was phony. He was trying to get his name cleared. He was pressuring people to drop the charges. There are a lot of startling new details, but they're consistent with this picture of Donald Trump thinking that the federal government is like the Trump organization, that people are there to serve him and defend him and serve at his pleasure as long as they're loyal to him, not necessarily the Constitution. But that particular detail is something different. That is if true, it's a little sketchy, and I don't doubt the veracity of it, but we want to know more about it. It suggests a sleazy political smear campaign that is in a wholly new category and can't be explained away. Some people have said, look, Donald Donald Trump was, in some kind of strange way, naive about how the government worked. He really did think it was like the Trump Organization. He really did think that the Attorney General kind of was his employee there to protect him. This is something much more sinister. And, Katie, I hope that we'll be learning more about it very soon.
You can't say Jeff Sessions or presumably his staff were naive about how the federal government worked or the rules. You're right to point that out, Michael Crowley. The other part of the story talks about what Mueller has been able to corroborate, and the story says that he has been able to corroborate James Comey's memos. And there's one in particular that it highlights, one that talks about Reince Priebus's handwritten notes showing that Donald Trump had called Mr. Comey to urge him to say publicly that he was not under investigation. If he's able to corroborate that one, doesn't that lend credence to all of the other ones, including the one where he describes Donald Trump as encouraging him to stop the investigation into Michael Flynn, which is a big one here?
Yeah, I think it absolutely does. And of the things that corroborate this are Reince Priebus's own notes as well. I mean, I think it gives an insight into how methodically Robert Mueller and his team is going through every aspect of this to really create a timeline and put together all of the pieces that could possibly lead up to obstruction. I mean, we don't know that it's there yet, but we see a lot. I mean, between the corroboration of Comey's testimony, this idea that not just that an aide of Jeff Sessions was looking to get dirt on James Comey, but that Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein then talked to White House counsel about James Comey, and then after that wrote this memo purporting, to say that the reason that he's unacceptable is because of the way he handled the Clinton probe.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say all those things put together just seem to really start to create a picture of what was going on in this White House before James Comey was fired that doesn't look good.
Also, Don McGahn's behavior, and it's important to point out that Don McGahn is not Donald Trump's lawyer.
Right.
Donald Trump's lawyer is not Don McGahn. Don McGahn is the lawyer for the government, the lawyer for the White House. He does not enjoy confidentiality between him and the president.
He does not. And the job is to act on behalf of the American people, not to protect the president, as you said. So the fact that he was going and sort of trying to convince the attorney general to remain loyal, essentially, to the president and protect the president is extraordinary, as is the fact that one of his deputies tried to lie to the president to keep him from firing Comey and convince the president that he needed to do it for cause, even though he didn't. I mean, a lot of the details in this are really
totally exposed if he has to go up with Robert Mueller. There's nothing holding any of his testimony back. No. But doesn't this, Peter, fit sort of a larger pattern? And we've been alluding to this, but Donald Trump and his opinion on how the government is supposed to work and who it is supposed to answer to. Just a few weeks ago, Donald Trump was on the Larry O'Connor radio show, and he said this. Take a listen.
But, the saddest thing is that because I'm the President of the United States, I am not supposed to be involved with the Justice Department. I'm not supposed to be involved with the FBI. I'm not supposed to be doing the kind of things that I would love to be doing. And I'm very frustrated by it.
Later in that interview, Peter, he seemed to imply that he could change paths and he could end up controlling or influencing the DOJ.
Well, that's exactly right. And in his interview just last week with the same Michael Schmidt who wrote that article down in Florida, President Trump said that he had the, quote, absolute right, unquote, to tell the Justice Department what to do about this investigation or opening an investigation, say, into his defeated rival, Hillary Clinton. His understanding of his role in terms of what it should be overseeing the FBI and Justice Department is at odds with what most presidents in the post-Watergate era have believed. That's not to say that in the history of the country, there haven't been presidents who abused the FBI, who used it for their political purposes. But basically, since the 1970s, it's been considered to be out of bounds. Now, whether that's legal obstruction or not is a big question. There's a big debate about this. I'm not a lawyer, but you can find lawyers out there who say, look, he is the President of the United States. Under the Constitution, he's the head of the executive branch, and he does, in fact, have great latitude in terms of directing the Justice Department and the Attorney General, even on investigations that might involve him. Of course, if it comes down to it, and Robert Mueller were to find an obstruction pattern and send it to the House of Representatives for an impeachment proceeding, they have the right to decide what constitutes obstruction under the Constitution as well. But there is a big debate about whether or not the president crossed lines if he did some of the things that are in this article.
And there's still more in this article that we haven't covered, including the fact that one of the lawyers in the White House lied to the president, misled the president, was afraid of telling the president that he had the authority to fire the FBI director because he was afraid the president would fire the FBI director. Michael, that lawyer still works in the White House. What does it say to you that even the teams inside that White House are afraid to tell the president the truth because they're afraid of what he might do?
Katie, it tells me that the big story that we're talking about tonight is merging right into the story that it has slightly bumped out of the way, which is this Michael Wolff book about life inside the Trump White House. So the consistency there, the dots that connect, are this picture of a president who is not even trusted or apparently respected by a great many of his own staff. Now, as you know, the White House disputes the contents of the Michael Wolff book, but there is a consistent theme here that people around the president don't feel like they are confident he can make rational decisions. They're trying to save him from himself. They're trying to, sometimes it would seem, save the country from the president. And that is a really stark example. You have, obviously, anyone who's in the White House counsel's office is going to be an accomplished, intelligent person. And you have a lawyer like that who is willing to essentially allow the president to be misled about his own powers for fear of what he might do, and whether the motivation was to save Trump's presidency or whether it was, to kind of protect the nation or the Constitution, doesn't matter. It's something that we just really haven't seen before, and does lend credence to Michael Wolff's account of what life in the West Wing is like around this president and how even the people who work for him view him.